Welcome, everybody, to the VALR Podcast. Today, I have a tremendous pleasure of welcoming someone that's very special and dear to me, and I'll get into that in a moment. Michael Jordaan, who many of you know very well in the South African context. He's a businessman, an entrepreneur, a leader, a former CEO of what is now the largest bank in South Africa by market cap. So it's a really great pleasure to welcome you, Michael, to this show.
Thank you, Farzam, and it's my pleasure to be speaking to you again.
Thank you so much. But what maybe not everybody knows is that Michael was the very first investor in VALR. And so for that, I am very grateful to you, Michael, and very privileged to have had you in my life, because you were also one of the first people to encourage me to actually start a startup, to start something that I was passionate about, leave the comforts of what was a very good job at the time at a bank, and to try to make a difference in the world. So I'm very grateful for you. I wanted to put that on record so that you do understand how grateful me and the team are. So very welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to getting into this.
But I think then I also need to express my gratefulness, because being a shareholder of VALR has been a very good ride. Thank you. And that's
You're very welcome.
due to you and your leadership and your team.
Thank you so much. Mutually beneficial. Thank you very much, Michael. So I actually wrote to your assistant, Michael, and I asked for a bio just to say if there's anything else that I don't really know about you. And then there was a lot. And I want to just go through a few of those things that some of the audience may not know. And so Michael was part of the South African Navy back in 1990, that is. He was also at Deutsche Bank. Many people know that he was affiliated with FNB because he was the CEO there. But what they may not know is that he started at Rand Merchant Bank on the Class of program. And that's actually where I think our first kind of interaction started, because I was also on the Class of program at the Rand Merchant Bank. And then Michael very quickly kind of rose to the ranks, CEO of Home Loans at FNB, CEO of eBucks at FNB. And we can probably talk about that, because that was, I think, the initial ideas of a digital currency back in 2000.
Correct.
And then you became the CEO of Customer Solutions. And then finally, at the tender age of 36, if I'm not mistaken, in 2004, the CEO of FNB, and you had a stint of a whole decade leading that group, becoming the most innovative bank in the world, being recognized for that. And then post that, starting Montegray, where you are right now, leading a whole bunch of different investments, Bank Zero, Rain, VALR, and many others. So I'm looking forward to hearing today more about your thoughts about the world's cryptocurrency. You were one of the early people into the space as well. And I think to start off with, Michael, just tell us a little bit about where you heard about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and how your journey into the digital asset space started.
Thank you, Farzam. I got involved as early as 2014. And I heard about it in depth in 2013 when I attended the Singularity University at San Francisco, which is all about exponential technologies and disruptive change in business and society. So once I probably understood it, it was pretty easy to see the revolutionary capability. Obviously, I wish I'd held on to all the Bitcoin I bought in 2014. While it was a great investment, it could have been much greater had I had the confidence to just hold on since 2014.
Got it. But you started getting into it in 2014 then. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, where did you first buy your cryptocurrency? Was it on a local exchange? Was it an international exchange?
Yeah, it was. It was, before you were around. So it was the predecessor of Luno. And they too, I had the privilege of knowing the founder, and he actually discussed the idea of what he was going to do at my house. The reason I didn't invest then, which was also a stupid investment decision, is I felt that it conflicted too much with the bank that I just left, because I could clearly see that in a sense, alternative currency challenges a lot of the traditional banking system. And I just, I think loyalty made me not participate in the equity there, but at least I found an exchange on which you could buy Bitcoin in South Africa, which was, pretty pioneering at the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, Luno is one of our main competitors right now. I've got a lot of respect for them. And actually, what many probably don't know is that when I was at the bank, actually, I was thinking and considering leaving to start working at Luno before starting VALR. So Marcus and I are also, we've had many chats in the past as well. He's a good guy.
He's a great guy too. But, I'm happy to have partnered with you, Farzam.
Thank you. Are there any particular aspects? So when people talk to you about Bitcoin and crypto assets, are there any particular aspects of it that most call to your heart or your view of the world, and what attracted you mostly to this?
I like the fact that this is something that is inherently global. One could even say is inherently borderless. And that's a wonderful way to think of the world. We have defined the world according to different countries and different borders, and we divided by all these languages and cultures and different things. So when you see something that is truly global, that I find that very appealing because we, for example, share the nature on Earth. There are a few times where we feel so together. Maybe COVID was such a time when the whole of humanity was threatened by a virus. But every now and then something truly global happens. The internet may have been one of those. And certainly when I saw Bitcoin and what it can do, and that it was borderless and that it was decentralized, and that it challenged many of our current institutions, I found that very exciting and frankly also a little bit scary.
Absolutely. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is actually how your views are of the traditional institutions, banking that you came from, this new world of crypto assets. As you know, in South Africa, there has been quite a dichotomy between these two. The traditional financial space has remained traditional. They have not embraced crypto assets. They don't offer any crypto assets, although that is starting to change. And then there's obviously players like VALR that have come up that are offering crypto assets that are growing very rapidly. So when you look into the future, what do you see with the interaction between traditional finance and the crypto asset space?
Bitcoin's been around long enough and has become significant enough that traditional institutions will have to embrace it, if somewhat tentatively. And that one can understand the tentative nature from two perspectives. The one is that, as exciting as this is as a revolutionary new currency and a new way of thinking, there are the darker aspects of it. I don't need to highlight all of them, but, clearly from money laundering to terrorism to, financing things that are more difficult to do in the traditional banking system. And the second one is the fact that it also inherently threatens the very existence of what we today know as a bank and the very institutions. And, so it's a difficult position for banks to enable something which not now, but in 10 years' time could really be threatening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we look at them, we're having many of the conversations right now with banks within South Africa and beyond about serving them and allowing them to offer crypto asset services to their customers. I would venture to say that within the next decade, we probably won't have financial institutions that don't have some type of offering of the crypto asset class. I remember I believe it was in 1997 that Morgan Stanley said that it would be irresponsible to expose their client data to this thing called the internet. And of course, now, there isn't really any institution that's not on the internet. So I think we're going to see something similar to that. I
do agree, Farzam. I do agree. Look, banks are inherently conservative, and that's actually a good thing, by the way, because they are the custodians of the public savings pool. It would be terrible if banks failed all around us all the time, the way it does happen in some other industries. So it's good that they're conservative. But if you take, for example, the fact that right now it's quite difficult to offer Bitcoin as security for a loan. But it's actually a very, very good security because it's a market that is liquid and trades 24/7 around the world. I could argue it's better than listed shares. I know
Absolutely.
it's very volatile and, you can't lend 100% against the asset. But, that is the type of awakening that still needs to happen in, let's say, the credit departments of the banks, that this is a liquid asset against which one could gear.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that you brought that up to 2 points that I wanted to make. Number one is our listeners may not realize that you actually have a PhD in banking supervision. So when you talk about the conservativeness, etc., it's coming from a place of great study. And then secondly, at VALR, what we've found is exactly that Bitcoin is a phenomenal asset to have as security. So right now on VALR, we allow the lending and the borrowing of crypto assets actually on an hourly basis, which is something that, again, is very new for traditional finance, which is generally on a daily basis. And then what's also interesting is the liquidation of these things, because whenever you have security, you need to make sure that the price doesn't move against you too quickly. In traditional finance, you have margin calls, etc. And what we see in the crypto space is quite automated liquidation of those asset classes. And when you have deep liquid markets, as you said, it's a very powerful asset class to have. One of the things that comes to mind is, I forget the name of the company, but there is actually, and I don't know if you saw this, but there is actually a company that gives loans to real estate developers. And one of the things that they do, they buy out the mortgages that they may have or the loans that they have, and they say, here, we're going to give you X amount to cover your current loan from other banks. We're going to top it up a little bit more so that you can actually buy Bitcoin with this as part of the package. And the idea there is that they have to hold the Bitcoin for 4 years as a hedge that's really idiosyncratic or has it's a completely independent risk to what they have.
Correct.
So I think we're going to see, to your point, much more of this as Bitcoin and crypto assets as a security. But of course, the volatility is still a challenging thing because it still remains tremendously volatile.
Well,
On that note,
clearly, if that business has been in operation for some time, they would have done themselves and their customers a big favor, because we know that in the long run, to date, your Bitcoin has appreciated. Of course, anything could happen in the future. There's no guarantee that will repeat itself. But historically, that would have been a very good thing to do, to enhance credit risk, reduce credit risk by forcing some Bitcoin purchase.
Absolutely. So regarding volatility, I want to hear your thoughts about the run that we've seen in Bitcoin and crypto assets, particularly since Trump came into power, or since the election, actually, in November, early November. Your thoughts on that, on the crypto asset market, and also where this is taking us into the future.
Farzam, I think the broad movement has gone from putting obstacles in the way of crypto adoption to making it a far more enabling environment. As I see it, the new administration is pretty clear that they are focusing on America first, and they want to make America the best place for a couple of things to win. One of them is AI, and another one is crypto. So I think you will see far more innovations of the type that you've just spoken about happening in future. And whether that is making it easier for companies to invest, for banks to do businesses with crypto, for more interesting structures to emerge in innovations. That I think is very interesting. It's also interesting, by the way, that it's being led by another South African or ex-South African, David Sachs, right? And he's got a portfolio which is both crypto and AI, which are two massive, massive things that are going to determine the future. Ironically, they're also kind of on the opposite spectrum. AI is ultimately a very, very centralized technology.
Wonderful. So going back to that kind of AI, first of all, I didn't know that David Sachs was actually South African. I thought you were referring to Elon Musk.
I think born in South Africa. There's South African roots, okay. Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So when we look, obviously there's been a tremendous, huge flurry of activity since early November. I think early November, the Bitcoin price was something like $69,000. We're now obviously close to the $100,000 mark with, volatility up and down from there. one of my next questions to you was going to be about holding Bitcoin as corporate treasuries. Like, what your thoughts are on that? You're obviously on the board of several companies. You are the chairman of Bank Zero and others. So I wanted to know, A, what are your thoughts about holding Bitcoin as part of corporate treasury? And then B, what that means for your views about Bitcoin into the future, and particularly the price.
Yeah, look, you're talking to somebody who, after all, is a conservative banker. I would say companies should always try and pay off debt first. I'm struggle with gearing to buy Bitcoin, much as that even historically would have been a good play. But if companies do have reserves, if they don't have debt and they're going to put those reserves into currency, I would actually encourage diversification. That means, put them in more than one currency, and one of them can be Bitcoin. I see no reason why it can't be. I do think accounting conventions have to come to the rescue here as well. And Bitcoin should be treated the way you treat other currencies, which is adjust them, mark to market them, put them through the income statement, etc. I think it's the uncertainty of accounting standards more than anything else that is holding that back.
Absolutely. And I think there has been some progress in changing that in some accounting standards. So I think we'll start to see that. You talked about leverage and not necessarily going for leverage. I'm very intrigued to hear your thoughts about MicroStrategy and their kind of play, because they're obviously very leveraged. They go and issue convertible debt and then buy Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor?
You see, I think it's fine in that instance because that is their clear strategy, and people who invest in them know that is what they're getting into. But if you have a conventional company, let's say you build buildings and you happen to have cash on hand and you put it in Bitcoin, but you also have a lot of gearing, I think there you start mixing things, and people don't know whether they're taking property risk, debt risk, or the Bitcoin, etc. But MicroStrategy is very clearly allowed people access to Bitcoin through a stock market mechanism, which didn't exist at the time. And, they've read the market well, and they've been quite ballsy about it, and good luck to them and their investors.
Excellent. Being obviously the conservative banker that you are, and I believe you're still the chairperson of Bank Zero, is there anything you can share about kind of the internal discussions about crypto assets when it comes to Bank Zero specifically?
No, Farzam. That is a pure play transactional bank. It's a South African bank that has set itself the goal of making transactions fees zero, which it offers, and offers all the user interface that comes with a traditional banking system, whether it's debit orders, funds transfers, real-time funds transfers. I think nonetheless, it can be inspired by what happens in the crypto market. The speed at which I can send Bitcoin to you regardless of where you are in the world. That's something which we would like to see mirrored in the conventional banking system. Clearly, we'll keep an open mind as to whether crypto itself or blockchain can be of assistance. For example, in South Africa, we know that the foreign exchange market is still quite complex and quite cumbersome and quite expensive. That will be one of the next things that Bank Zero attacks. And maybe there's a role for Bitcoin or for blockchain, rather, to facilitate transactions across the world. But we aren't ideologically focused on that. It has to be blockchain, or we'll look at what the existing solutions are and do whatever it makes best sense for customers. For me, it's an interesting play because they say that the sign of intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts in your head at the same time. I do think you could have a situation where challenger banks do very, very well, and crypto does very well, as we find out what the best use cases for both of these are in the world. But what is clear is that the way one can do transactions and transfer value does really, really challenge the conventional model where banks charge high fees to do that. Those fees are out the way. That's what crypto has shown us.
Absolutely. So taking a little step back from crypto, Michael, you're a mind that I have a great deal of respect for, and kind of the way you look at the world. You've been on the cutting edge of a lot of the technology pioneering that we've seen across the last couple of decades. So I wanted to just take a little step back from crypto and say, is there any particular way that you create a framework from interpreting what's going on in the world and how you see where it's going. The world, whoever you talk to these days, there's pretty much consensus that the world's a pretty crazy place right now. There's a lot of volatility in all sorts, not just the crypto markets, but in politics and in change, etc. So, taking a step back, do you have a particular, and it could be philosophical, spiritual, logical, whatever it may be, but how do you interpret the world and where it's going?
Look, as an opening statement, I just like to say that I'm a nerd or a geek. I like to read a lot. But that's how you interpret the world, is you just open to it. And you do need to read books of people that you don't inherently agree with. So that's very important, because if you can lock yourself in your own echo chamber.
Yes.
So reading is important. I do have a very global attitude towards everything. I happen to be living in South Africa. I love it, but we're a tiny part of the world economy, 0.33% of GDP. So you just need to not take yourself too seriously in that setup and think globally first. If there's a way of interpreting everything, we need to understand that we're not as rational as we think we are. People are highly influenced by institutions, by cultures, by incentives. And a lot of the behavior that you'll see in the world is driven not by rationality, but by those type of things, by ideologies and adherence to tribes and institutions and incentives. And then I also think that we need to understand in the world that there are a lot of myths around us. We have created myths. If you read the book Sapiens, for example, it's not just fashion, it's the very notion of institutions and laws, and even money is a myth that we've created, that it has value. They're very useful myths, by the way, but everything around us is myths, and those things can change over time. And once again, that does make something like crypto very interesting, because who says that the myth of money that we created in the past needs to be the same one that we have into the future? And then maybe finally that there are many, many patterns that keep on repeating themselves throughout history, not always in exactly the same shape or in the same time form, but they do happen. So, those would be some of the pointers that I have when I read and try to make up my mind about this confusing world that we live in.
Wonderful. You mentioned Sapiens, which is a great book. Are there any particular books that have had a big impact on you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Gee, Farzam, it's always such a difficult question, because it's not one. It's I can show you my office at the back here, and that this is 1/100th of the amount of books that I have. But I do think if you're entrepreneur, 0 to 1 is a very, very good book to read. But
That's right.
Typically what I do is I follow people that I find very interesting, whether they're entrepreneurs or leaders, sometimes historically, and you read their stories. And I find that inspiring. And sometimes I go back and I read some of those old books again. Sometimes the marginal value of reading new books are not as good as some of the great old books that you've got. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to not give you a book. I'm just encouraging people to read a lot and to read widely.
Good advice. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I'd like to take a little step into South Africa and to get your thoughts about the country and crypto and Bitcoin, etc. And as you know, there's been a big discourse about a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the United States. There have been central banks from Norway to the Czech Republic that have been talking about buying Bitcoin as a reserve for central banks. There are countries like El Salvador who have explicitly for several years now been buying Bitcoin as part of their treasury. So I wanted to get your thoughts on a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and particularly for South Africa. What are your thoughts about
that? So I'm a crypto bull, and I own Bitcoin. And I think when you have reserves, it makes sense to have diversification, as I earlier said. And I think if people are going to have gold, you may also have digital gold, which is Bitcoin. But where I struggle a bit is that I think there are a lot of punters who want Bitcoin reserves, that the government must just enter the market and buy these coins so that their investments go up. And in a country like South Africa, I wonder whether we should be investing in reserves or whether we should be investing in the economy, in real assets and in education and in things that make the country grow. So I would say, rather than build up all these reserves, we should be investing so that we can grow. So the debate is actually not a South African debate. I think it's one for the wealthy countries who feel that they don't have those opportunities to make the economy grow. But even there, we know that many of the developed markets in the world have massive debts. So I'm trying to tell you that I'm both a crypto bull, and at the same time, I wonder about the motivations for this debate about a strategic reserve. There are other investment opportunities, and there are big debts that governments need to pay off before they have these big funds to invest in.
That's a great thought. So let's take that a step further. So when you look at South Africa over the last few years, it's gone through a pretty, I would say, a rough patch, let's say, just prior to this recent election. Do you have thoughts? And I know Bruce Whitfield had asked a bunch of leaders across South Africa about what they would do if they were the president for half an hour. But in that vein of thinking, are there particular initiatives that you would do in South Africa? You mentioned education right now, but are there certain things that you would invest in that would really change the trajectory of South Africa?
Yes, Farzam, there are many. If one could just wave a magic wand, the one I would like to solve in South Africa would be property ownership. And the reason for that is that it's actually relatively easy to do if the will is there, because there's a massive amount of property that people already live on as if they are the owners that are just not in their names yet. So this would be in what were the traditional homelands. It would be the areas that are on the tribal land. It's also a lot of areas where there's informal housing right now, much of which belongs to government. So with a proper system of titling, allocating titles to people who already live on the land, we could have many, many millions of families, and therefore multiples of those millions of people, easily 20 million people who could then live in properties that they own that are debt-free. And debt-free is important because it then means that they can use that capital for other things. You could either sell the property or gear the property to start a business, etc. So all that land is there, it's available. That would be my magic wand. There's a massive program of titling. And other countries have done this. By the way, other countries in the world have done it. Other countries in Africa have done it. It's for me, a very, very obvious challenge that has a solution. So property ownership and titling for the symbolic reasons, but also because it actually then leverages capital that is sitting there, but is dead capital right now.
Got you. So when we go back and combine the South Africa and crypto, you mentioned, maybe, investing in a strategic Bitcoin reserve for South Africa isn't the right thing right now. If we have capital, we should invest into property rights, as you just talked about, education, and, numerous other ideas I'm sure you'd have. When you look at the crypto asset space, do you see that? I know we talked a little bit about the interaction with traditional finance right now. Do you still see it then peripheral to kind of the country and where we're going? And the reason I'm also saying that is we talked about gold previously a little bit. Obviously, South Africa does have gold reserves on balance sheet. Do you just kind of say let's just stay with the status quo? The gold can stay there. Let's not invest in Bitcoin. Let's invest in those other things. Or do you start seeing a change in kind of the investment thesis of our central banks and treasury?
Farzam, I do. So just like I see a change from the analog world to the digital world, I can also see that the massive attachment that we put on gold will over time change to digital gold. And the very rough calculation here is that the market cap of Bitcoin today is 1/10 of the market cap of all the gold in the world. So I think that'll change. I may be wrong, but 1/10 is digital of what the physical gold is. And that's why I'm saying I think from a point of diversification, it's probably a sound investment strategy to not have everything in gold, but to take some of that gold, or not everything gold, to what you have in gold. You could put a portion of that in the digital version of gold. But once again, speaking about South Africa, I think in our case, the challenge is not building up huge amount of reserves. It's actually investing funds to the maximum because we need growth. We have a massive unemployment issue here. We need jobs in the country. So I think the return by growing the economy is arguably bigger than the one you would get out of potential growth in the future. And I say that as bullish as I am about crypto, I don't think we should be doing financial investments. We should be making real investments now.
I think that's a very good point. I had a friend, Michael, who was a teacher in the Eastern Cape in South Africa, and a very optimistic individual that I saw one day. He was pretty down, and I had asked him how he's doing, and he said that in the school where he was at, they were teaching the children that 1/2 plus 1/3 equals you add the numerator and you add the denominator. And so he said, if we're teaching our children the wrong things in maths, how can we expect our country to advance? So I think to your point, I think there's a tremendous amount of investment that we need to do in South Africa for our population, for education. I think we fall behind quite significantly in our national test results. So I think that's a very valid point. You mentioned earlier, going back to Bitcoin and gold, that you are an owner of Bitcoin. Are you an owner of gold?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay, so that kind of, all right.
Yeah.
Wanted to see. Okay, that shows also your views there. Other opportunities. I want to take this opportunity to see other opportunities for South Africa to shine. So we talked about the property rights. We talked about education. Crypto, as you said, I think it will be there and it will continue to grow, as you said. As a leader in the South African establishment, you've got a voice. And if the president and other leaders could listen to this podcast, what beyond what you just said, is there any other message that you would have for the country overall?
Look, we live in a wonderful, wonderful country with wonderful people around us. South Africans are great, authentic, friendly, funny people who make a plan and get on with it. We have the capabilities to be growing at 5%. And I'm using that figure decidedly because that would create the type of job growth that we need and take many people out of the indignified position of not having jobs and being on social grants. We just have to take some of the tough decisions. Now, growth is not something that magically happens. There are many countries in the world that got growth right, and you need to go and look what are some of the things that they did and implement them, even if there's some short-term trade-offs to be made. So growth is a choice. That would be the most important point that I would say. It's a choice in business when you're a business leader, but it's a choice of the government as well. So my message would be, we've got the stuff that we need to grow at 5%. We just need to make some of those tough decisions and reforms, and we could have a very, very good future in the country. I remain bullish that we will do better. Whether we'll get to 5, I'd have to see some action happening. But I think the general mood in the country right now is a lot better than I've experienced it in a lot of the preceding years. Some of that is because of the power failures or the load shedding, as it's known over here. That's not happening anymore. That was very demoralizing, and that seems to have come right. But I think also the coalition government that we have has been supported by a large number of South Africans and seems to be getting pragmatic decisions from that coalition government, and that too is supportive of growth. So I'm bullish.
Wonderful. One of the things that has been a challenge I think it's the world over right now, is corruption. Any thoughts on kind of how we transcend corruption to actually get the investments to the right place? Is it something that we just need to slowly grow out of? Are there initiatives that you've in place? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Farzam, I think given that there's a crypto angle to our discussion, I do think there are things that we can put on the blockchain so that people see where money goes. So disclosure is a very, very important part of fighting corruption. Sunlight is the best policeman. And through blockchain and making it auditable and open to everybody else, I think that would go a long way.
I love that. Just in creating transparency. That's really wonderful. Good. When you look at the future again, I know you're a very optimistic person, and we can talk a lot about that. But is there anything particularly that worries you about our future, and what are you doing about that?
Yeah, I think the way we've treated nature, it worries me because it's an exhaustible resource. So, whether it's as simple as just planting more trees, which, I do in the area where we are, and generally caring for nature, I think that worries me. It obviously has to do with the fact that there are many of us on the earth, too many billions, one could argue. That worries me. The other thing that worries me is debt. I mean, I've referred to it a couple of times in the previous discussions. I mean, debt
Yes.
is one of those funny things that creeps up on you, and it seems to be okay. And then one day you notice it, the creditor said that's enough, and then it's very tough to deal with it. I think there's that famous line of how you go bankrupt. It's slowly, slowly, and then suddenly.
Yeah.
So the debt ratios in the big parts of the world, the developed parts of the world, are getting to those levels where I think it's very, very difficult, and it's dragging on growth. On top of it, you have a lot of unfunded liabilities, pension liabilities, etc., obligations towards the future. So those are massive things that I think need to be dealt with. Now, I must say what seems to be happening in the States through DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that's very exciting. That's the type of cost cutting that would happen in the corporate world when you're under pressure. Now, not all costs need to be cut. Some of them may actually be very good. I hope that there is also a reevaluation. I mean, in South Africa, for example, we had assistance on combating AIDS and HIV, and that's been, temporarily cut. I hope that there's a reevaluation. But it also seems that there was a whole lot of excess. So, and those are the type of things that can bring down debt. And the advantage of bringing down debt is not only that, future taxpayers are saddled with less obligations, but less government spending leads to lower inflation. Lower inflation leads to lower interest rates. Lower interest rates are very, very good for the economy. The economic growth goes up and job creation goes up. So, we may go through some short-term pain there. That's an example of short-term pain that could lead to a higher growth globally.
Absolutely. I think that is also one of the things that has been worrying me over the last, I would say, decade, actually. And one of the main reasons that I also got into the crypto asset space, because I thought, okay, this isn't an asset that can just be devalued at the strike of a keyboard button. When I look at the debt across the world, actually in my class of interviews, we talked a lot about the debt, and there were some countries at the time that were below 100% debt to GDP. The United States was just a little bit above 100% debt to GDP at that time, and it's grown a lot more now. Ray Dalio, in some of his books, The Changing World Order, etc., has talked about real momentous shifts in the world order of the world. Specifically as it comes to debt. Is this something that you see on the horizon that is, needs a little bit of an adjustment? You said, slowly, then suddenly. Or do you see in our lifetimes a real drastic reset of what the status quo is, with the US dollar being as the reserve currency? We know that's changed in our history. So is this something you think will solve, or do you think it ends up in a big recalibration of our financial system?
Farzam, that's a big question, and we'll only really know the answer in a decade or two or three. I mean, this is the type of time span that we speak about. So I don't think. I mean, the dollar is very powerful and it's still the default currency of the world, and attempts to unseat it right now are ludicrous. It's not going to happen now. But we do know that the path is unsustainable. The trajectory of debt accumulation by the US and by many other Western governments just cannot continue at this rate. There's also a social welfare state that is very expensive, and these are all the future liabilities. It just won't be affordable. So there will have to be adaptation. Throw on top of it AI, and the fact that AI in time will change the nature of the workplace and of labor. And now, that there's a wonderful part of that, which is, goods could become a lot less costly. But there's a bad part of it, that there may not be the same amount of job creation out of economic growth that we see before. So it's a very brave future that we're entering in. And I would just rather have it that, one enters it with less debt than the debt that we're currently accumulating. On top of that, this massive technological disruption that comes through AI is an undisputed move of the world from west to east. So that's where the economic center of gravity is moving, and it's China, but it's the whole East. It's India and that entire area. So the big clash of our time, obviously, is between the USA and China. Right now, it's evidenced itself in trade warfare, but sometimes a trade war is a precursor to a real war, and it'll take some deft diplomacy on both sides to avoid something like that happening in the next decade or 2 or 3.
Do you think the chances of that are quite high to have, let's say, a World War III or something like that? Or you think we're going to, like, what are your views on that?
You know, Farzam, what I do is I'm not clever enough to know what those percentages are. So I actually go to Polymarket, which is a very interesting website, also based on blockchain, and where people can actually wager on their views. And the very interesting thing is that when people have to put money behind their views, it seems to be more accurate than even the professionals, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's easy to have a view if it doesn't cost you anything, but if you have skin in the game, you make you're extra careful. I can't tell you what the latest percentage is there, but if somebody's listening to us now and is interested in that, I'm pretty sure that you could find a percentage there or make a market in it. But it's definitely not zero.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, so that's Polymarket for everybody that's listening. And I was looking at, I think there was one prediction market about the use of a nuclear weapon within the next few years. At one point, it was at 10%. So it was that's much higher than obviously I would hope for. But it's a very interesting time that we're obviously living in. Back to Bitcoin. Do you have a price prediction for the next 5 to 10 years?
I have to be so careful with predictions. I'm not, guiding anyone into this. I've no, dog in this fight. But I would say that ratio for me that's interesting is the market cap of physical gold versus Bitcoin, which I see as digital gold. So it's 1/10 of gold right now, which means if you believe there's going to be parity in 5 or 10 years' time, which is a reasonable assumption, then Bitcoin could go up 10 times. It could, of course, be that gold comes down, and then that's not the case. But so I look at those two ratios, and that would guide me. You can do your own calculation what that means in terms of a price.
Yeah, I actually have done that calculation. My calculation comes to 899,000 if you see parity between Bitcoin and gold, the market caps. And my view is that we'll see that within the next 5 to 10 years. And I think one of the things that I think a lot about is kind of the change in the world since I was in high school. And when I was in high school, we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't even have email until a little bit later. And when you think about the tremendous change that's happened over the past 20, 25 years, and then you forecast that forward to say, wow, like I couldn't check anything on my cell phone because I didn't have a cell phone. And now where's that going? And to your point about AI and crypto, I think a lot of people are talking about AI in kind of silo and crypto in a silo. I think there's going to be a lot of magic when AI and crypto come together. And when we have agents that are looking to pay for services, when you have automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, etc. Any thoughts on the intersection there with AI and crypto?
Farzam, I agree with you that there are going to be things that happen automatically, and to the extent that there are payments and settlements that are required, and they could even be microtransactions, that it's possible or maybe even likely that crypto will just be an easier way to do so. Whether you sell, micro pieces of the solar power on your roof to your neighbor and then buy it back a bit later when they're not producing it, to micro commerce, maybe subscription models change, that when you watch something or read something, you don't pay a monthly subscription, but you pay a tiny proportion per song or per article that you read, or a video clip that you do. And there'll be machine learning and algorithms behind it, and some of it will be governed by AI. So I haven't figured out which, in this scenario, which one should back. But I think there are some far smarter minds than me that are working on exactly that right now.
And let's come back to this smart mind that we have on this podcast, which is you, and look at Montegray. And obviously, you guys have made a bunch of investments. When I say you guys, predominantly you, I don't know if there's anybody else that you're working with there. But do you have a thesis now for that fund? And I know at some point you had kind of exhausted your funds and you were just kind of reaping the benefits. But when you think about investing right now, are there any kind of theses that you personally have or Montegray has about where the world is going and how to benefit from that?
Farzam, I mean, it's quite simple, really, that the world is changing very fast, and that there are certain companies where that internally are not changing as fast as the world is changing outside. And they may be some of the big companies that arguably may not exist in 10 or 20 years' time because the world's changing. And then there are startups that are more prone to act quickly, they're more agile, and they can use the latest technology, which in many cases gives them tremendous cost benefits. So if you can find entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial teams that have a track record of executing well and that have spotted such an opportunity where they can use some form of new technology or combine that new technology with a new business model, they can actually have rapid growth. And that's kind of the broad thesis. It's valid in South Africa, and it's also valid in the world. We think Bank Zero is one of those. The cost structure is extremely low. That's why it's easy to sustain zero fees. Rain is a good example of 5G. 5G isn't something that was invented in South Africa, but it's been packaged in a very interesting business model where you buy direct, so you don't have to pay intermediaries any cost. It doesn't have any or very few physical locations, so that's not costly. And it brings you fast, unlimited Wi-Fi at homes. The coverage is more than all the fiber providers together in the country. So fast, affordable internet, that is really, really challenging, definitely to the prior technologies like ADSL or 4G. And so there are many such examples, a new technology, a new team that manages in a new way, that packages in a way that doesn't sell, in the case of Rain, gigs, but just makes it unlimited. That certainly challenges the historic business models. And that'll happen more and more in the economy all over the world. It's a very exciting time to be a consumer, by the way, because you're just going to get more and more value. Sometimes many things are going to be free. A lot of AI, that didn't exist a year ago is now available for free, for example. So it's going to be a bit tougher on producers, on businesses, on individuals looking for the job market. But my message to them would just be lean into this. Just don't deny that this is happening. Face the facts with responsibility and find ways to make yourself better using all the technologies that are out there.
Have you heard of a gentleman called Jeremy Rifkin? And he's written a book called Near Zero Marginal Cost Society.
No, but I think I get his thesis.
Yeah,
and he's right.
To your point, and actually what he said, which I thought was very interesting, is he said, if you look at the world, capitalism has really assumed that, we drive costs down as much as possible, increase profit margins as much as possible. But he said, what happens when you drive your costs down so much that they get to zero? Because it's very difficult to charge for zero. And so his thesis kind of talks about what happens even when physical things, you get to the near marginal cost of zero, that it starts changing your entire societal order, and people go much more into the arts, is what he talks about. And there's an explosion of kind of creativity, which is very interesting, that I thought.
And zero has become the default price of our time.
That's right.
Some would call it freemium, where there's a free part, and then if you want more and value adds, you pay for it on top. But free is pervasive. There are ways of listening to music for free, watching movies for free, sending email for free, starting businesses for, or at a very low cost. To an extent that I think many large corporates still don't get. And it's just a matter of time till agile new competitors that have these very, very low costs. And by the way, some of the real costs that they have are outsourced or variable, go to other places where the costs are very low. So once again, very exciting, but also very challenging. It's going to be a very interesting future. I just wish I was 20 years younger, given the exciting future we have.
We're also making advances in our longevity, right? So is it true? I heard somewhere that Rain is actually accepting Bitcoin payments. Is that a rumor, or is that true?
No, that's not as far as I know. No.
Okay, I thought I had seen that somewhere. Okay. So last question I have for you is there a question that I should have asked, or other podcasters that you've spoken to should have asked, that they haven't, and that you'd like to share the answer to that question? And really, this kind of goes to that personal stuff, learnings, insights that you may have had. I'd love to give you just a free rein to share any wisdom that you have with our listeners.
Farzam, you're putting me on the spot, so I'm just going to a lot of people say, what must they do to be successful in their lives and their career? And there are many, many answers. The one that has worked for me in corporate life, my personal life, is surrounding yourself with people who are better than you. If you can do that, and you're going to be very stimulated, and you hopefully also going to be very successful. So life is about people. It's about long-term relationships, and if you can forge those relationships with people who I say are better than you, that's good. You don't want to play tennis and always be the better tennis player. You play a much better game when somebody else challenges you.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Michael, it's been a great pleasure and an honor. As I said, I got a great deal of respect for you, so I'm very glad to have had this conversation. Thank you so much.
And to you, Farzam. Thank you so much.
Thank you.